The next topic, the next guest, this speaker is going to talk about perhaps one of the most important issues, one of the most important countries in the coming decades when it comes to the question of free speech, and that's Turkey. Asli Erdogan trained as a physicist, but is now one of Turkey's leading writers, both of fiction and of non-fiction. She's been outspoken in her views on issues such as prisons, torture, the Kurds, and women's rights. And her outspokenness has got her sacked twice from the journal Radical for being too outspoken and forced her into exile. She now lives in exile in Austria. So can you welcome Asli Erdogan to talk about Turkey?
Hello, thanks for inviting me and listening to me. Well, I had first prepared a speech about Turkey's present situation, but then I thought maybe my own story should also be mentioned, which is a perfect mirror of Turkish narrative about becoming more and more democratic that somehow skipped me and thousands and millions of people in that narration of becoming democratic in the last 10 years. I'm a writer of literature, novels, short stories, poetry, poetic prose, and I'm also a columnist, human rights activist, as well as a physicist in the past. I've been called a modernist or existentialist by European critics. And in Turkey, I am usually called an immoralist or nowadays even a terrorist. Everything I've written so far has been luckily published, with the exception of my very first essay when I wrote as still a physicist. I had come back from CERN, Center of European Research for High Energy Physics, back to 90s Turkey. That time was there was this deep state, a severe civil war. Entire cities were shut down to public and press for 5 days. Şırnak was bombarded by the military that time, that's in 90s. The hotel was burned where the Salman Rushdie's publisher and writer Aziz Nesin was inside, 37 casualties. That's the 90s Turkey I returned to. And I wrote an article about a black man who was a black African immigrant who ended up in 90s Turkey, somehow got caught in our system. And at that time, 157 African immigrants were arrested, or rather, they never saw the court. They were taken to a camp in the southeast of Turkey, in the Kurdish region, where there was severe fighting. So I was the only witness, because I was living with the African immigrants that time. And now I realize it was my first and the most important political fight, and I lost. I had to leave Turkey in '94 to Brazil. In my CV it said I went for a PhD. And I came back only 2 years later as a writer with 2 finished books. Here's a book. It's a collection of Turkey 2011, Freedom to Thought, the prison bars. And page after page, I looked at it last night, and it is my story. There are about 100 incidents here. One is Festus Okay, is an African killed in a police station. The police was let free. I had been a witness of such scenes 20 years ago. One is the case of Harakiri, humor magazine that was given a huge sentence, so it was closed in the first issue. I had written something for them. One is the case of Fazıl Say, our famous composer. He has composed a ballet to one of my poetic proses. Now he's on trial for offending religious feelings of people, up to 1.5 years in prison. One is the case of Ahmet Şık, a well-known journalist who wrote on the army of Imam. He was in prison for a year, and then we 125 people came together and signed, and the book, the banned book, was published with our names as a collective solidarity. One other name is Hrant Dink, an Armenian journalist. He was shot in 2006, was a friend of mine. And that's how I went back to press, writing about him. And Hrant Dink's case ended up as the judge being unable to find any organization behind that murder. And one other case is Ragıp Zalakalu, my fellow columnist, my great friend. He was arrested last year, spent 5 months in jail. Now the prosecutor asks for 10 to 15 years. And you know him perhaps because he was nominated to Nobel Peace Prize. And he's prosecuted by the anti-terror law. So from 90s Turkey, what happened till the next 10 years, I will try to sum up. As after I returned in 96, I published a novel which got quite good reviews in Turkey, and they invited me as a writer of literature and gave me a little column in a newspaper called Radikal. And my first article on the Kurdish issue was about 3 teenager girls that were raped by the paramilitaries. One was dead, and she was she had mental problems. She was a child with a mental retardation, and she was raped by a bayonet. And when I wrote that article, I couldn't understand first time, but the second day, when it repeated itself, I realized I was being threatened. I was so shocked. You are defending a 15-year-old rape victim killed by a bayonet, and you are getting threatened. You see, I'm kind of the idiot. I just couldn't really understand Turkey since the 45 years of age I've been living there. And then I wrote about tortured children, again teenagers, then inclusively on prisons, though I have never been myself to prison before. And in 2001, there was a big hunger strike of prisoners in Turkey, which I actively supported. Another loss case, 120 people died in the hunger strikes of 2000. And I was fired from Radikal. In 2003, luckily my books were published in Norway and France and among other countries, and I was being compared to Arto at some point, but I was unable to read any reviews on me for like 2 or 3 years, because after a lynching campaign from the first pages of the main press, for 2 years I couldn't read any interviews, any reviews. I couldn't even read emails. I was 47 kilos, all my eyebrows had fallen out from the... And I say, I mean, rape is nothing compared to mass lynching. This was the biggest trauma of my life by far. And I still stay at that point. You never know how much it hurts until you are openly taken as your pubic hair is discussed on the first pages, and you are immoral, you are this, you are that, you are... And simply because I was a woman, nothing else. 2006 was the death of Hrant Dink, where intellectuals like me had to start to question this narrative of Turkey becoming democratic, things changing. This was a slap in our face. I think a slap we deserved. And Hrant was killed, 100,000 people. We marched on the streets of Istanbul, and I went back to press writing, why have I felt so lonely if we were 100,000? Because I do remember the last days of Hrant. He was very, very much left alone, like most of us actually in Turkey. Whoever does a bit of an opposition, ends up is surrounded by a complete aura of silence and alienation. I have 7 books translated to 11 languages, one of them, and I have not given a single reading or a TV interview for 7 years in Turkey. They just don't want me to even talk about literature or Dostoevsky or... Oh yes, once I talked on Dostoevsky and once on physics. And comes now the 2008, another lynching campaign. It was small because I was among the intellectuals who apologized to Armenians. But came the worst in 2010. I was fired from Radikal again, and I joined Özgür Gündem. Now, back in 90s, Özgür Gündem was a notorious newspaper of the Kurdish people. Even having one issue could end up in being in prison or killed. 80, not 18, 80 of its journalists were killed. Musa Anter was the famous columnist, third-page columnist. Now I have the third page. He was shot at the age of 76. But this was the long-gone 90s. So, what happens today to the Özgür Gündem journalists? It's a Kurdish paper. It's written in Turkish, because most Kurdish people are not very, of course. The Kurdish was a banned language for a long time, and it still is in many ways. Although we have a Kurdish TV, we have people who are taken to court for listening to Kurdish songs. When I entered Özgür Gündem, they brought me the reports of the last year's arrests. And I couldn't believe. I'm from the West, I'm from Istanbul. We never really know the full story of the Southeast. And I added one by one, yes, there were 1,000 arrests in 1 year. You see, I really tried hard to hold on to this narrative of democratization, opening up. But when they show you name by name 1,000 arrests, it's a bigger slap. And as I entered the paper, there was the elections and everything really turned upside down in my life as well. The mass arrestations increased. Finally, on November 1st, Ragıp Zarakolu, my fellow columnist, was arrested. He's from IPA, International Publishers Organization. He's from association. He's a freedom of fighter for all his life, 62-year-old man. Along with Büşra Ersanlı, professor of law, they got arrested on November 1st, along with 40 people. Every day was like 20, 30, 40 arrests. And from November 1st to April 5th, December 5th, the day I was supposed to leave for Zurich as the Stadtschreiberin, I had this 5 a.m. syndrome, like thousands of people in Turkey have, because the police bustings are at 5 a.m. in Turkey, and they come, really terrorizing with axes and hundreds of policemen. For a woman like me or for a 62-year-old man, you feel kind of proud. Thousands of Robocops and all this. And so I was unable to sleep until 5 a.m. And now I talk to people in Turkey, they are unable to sleep still. 1 more year has passed, and this 5 a.m., it's silly. Of course, they can come at 6, but somehow you wait for 5 and then go to bed. I know a lady, a friend, who was invited to Germany. She has written a wonderful book, just a reportage with kids in the 90s, to be a child in the 90s Turkey, in the Kurdish part. And she said that the first time I sleep without my bra, because she was so afraid of police. She could take it off only when she was invited to Germany. So I just end up with a few figures and then I couldn't go back to Turkey. Now I am in exile. Unlike most people who talk here, I completely lack courage. I just hate the idea of thinking myself in a 3-hour plane ride, going to Turkey, going to jail, and never to come out 18 years later. And I have a prothese in my neck, so I am afraid. I try as hard as I can to stay abroad. And I know that the Turkish law that was changed in 2006, anti-terror law, it gives, you can be arrested even if you are not a member of a terrorist organization. You are treated as a member if you defend the same cause. Let's say I defended very many times here too, education in mother tongue. I'm not Kurdish, I'm Circassian. So I defend the rights, let's say, for the mother tongue education, for Kurds, Circassians, for Scotch, whoever. And as long as there is a terrorist organization who defends the same cause, I can be charged with the same years, which is minimum 5, can go up to 15. So it's no joke. And only last week, I have the statistic, a lady who was in charge of an Alevite organization. She was arrested among these 8,000. Yes, the arrests went up and up and up, and the number is estimated to be between 6,000 to 8,000. All members of a legal party, unions, NGOs, human rights organizations, journalists, lawyers, and now the sentences are being given. And last year, this lady, president of an Alevite organization, she got sentenced to 18 years. And 3 other ladies who are from BDP party, the legal Kurdish party, they got sentences 9 years. So students, there are about 740 university students in jail at the moment. Recent sentences were from 10 years to 12 years given. I mean, it's really horrifying. If I read you the figures, I will be silent. I won't say anymore. At the moment, 68 union members or leaders are in jail, 740 students, university, 8 parliamentarians, 30 mayors, 30 lawyers, and 77 journalists. This doesn't include writers, which are about 4 or 5. Depends on how you define a writer. And 2 weeks after I left Turkey, Özgür Gündem was busted by police. So all its editors-in-chief were arrested. So now this list includes names of my friends. The 77, according to my statistics, 63 are from the Kurdish press. And just one last thing I say is Halil Savda. He writes for our paper. He used to write. He's a conscientious objector, as I am. And he was in jail many times. And he organized a walk. He was walking from Uludere. Last year, Kurdish peasants were killed, smugglers were killed, bombed by the military. From there to Ankara. And last 2 weeks ago, he was taken under custody and beaten up, but he continued his walk for peace. So I wanted to end my speech with him.
Thanks, Asli, and my apologies that we're running out of time, that we've had to cut you short. Next speaker is Pelin Basaran, who's an arts producer and researcher. She's founder of Park, an Istanbul-based organisation supporting artistic development and the performing arts and defending freedom of expression. And she'll be talking about the ways and means by which censorship operates in Turkey. Pelin.
Hi everyone. First, I would like to give my apologies for reading my presentation because I want to be sure that I stay within the time limit. The presentation will be based on the findings Siyah Band, the name of the project, can be translated as black tie or black ribbon, a platform that researches censorship cases in the arts in Turkey. We look at various actors, agents that enact censorship as well, the different methods employed, document and publicize these cases online via our website. We concentrated on cases of censorship after the year of 2000s in the fields of visual arts, cinema, music, dance and theater. I grouped the censorship cases according to the involved agents and modalities under 3 headings, although there is a considerable fluidity between these categories. Governmental censorship, societal sensitivities, private art institutions, and art markets. Before starting, I want to say that there's a brochure prepared by Shanar, Initiative for Freedom of Expression, about silencing music in Turkey, a briefing on last 12 months. And if you want to get it, it's English. You can get it from me or Shanar. And governmental censorship. There is a decrease in the censorship through legal mechanisms after 2000s due to the adaptation of the state to the EU negotiation process and successive legal reform packages. Especially after the reformation of the Article 301 of Penal Code, which centers on the denigration of Turkishness, it has been more difficult to apply the legal mechanisms for censorship. But of course, we can still talk about this. Asli gave a great summary of that, but I want to also give the examples in arts field. In the last years, many Kurdish artists, as well as Kurdish local governors, journalists, and activists have been subjected to systematic arrests through the ongoing KCK, urban organization of PKK, operation that started in 2009. But we all know that these operations, which claimed connections between these individuals and these urban organizations, in fact, aim to delegitimize the Kurdish rights struggle. I would like to give an example of Bar Kültür Center in Batman. This is one of the artists who is waiting to be arrested from the culture center. This center regularly organizes theater, folk dance, and music events and workshops. It has very dedicated young audience and teachers. A criminal court was brought against 13 members of its music group and theater company for violating of law of meetings and demonstrations on the grounds that they participated in Newroz celebrations, attended press conferences, and provoked the public with erbani, which kind of instrument, this instrument, that they sang along with. The artists were prohibited from performing at any social events, playing erbani, and singing for 5 years. In the interview I conducted with the artist, I learned that this was not only one example, and many courts were brought against almost all members of the center, with charges of presenting propaganda for the terrorist organization PKK, or being member of this organization. 2 artists have already been imprisoned, and some were released, but this is a conditional release. They have been temporarily banned from social and public life for 5 years. In addition to the pressure on the artists, young people who attend the center's classes are being threatened and obstructed in order to reduce the cultural center's effect on the public and undermine its legitimacy. Here, as you see, the artistic expressions were identified as political expressions, and the artists were viewed as terrorists by the government. Thus, the artists and their practice are criminalized and marginalized through the state's suppressive policy towards artists in the Kurdish region. What complicates the situation of Kurdish artists is that these suppressive mechanisms are enacted rather arbitrarily. For instance, a song regularly played on the government-sponsored Kurdish channel TRT6 can become qualified as an illegal act when sung at a peace meeting in Diyarbakir. Government undertakes indirect censorship by supporting and promoting the creation and distribution of nationalist and conservative art practices and excluding the ones which would threaten the existing regime. For example, the director of cinema in the ministry declared that they are working on the new regulation to give more support to conservative and mainstream family films. Also, government finds procedural ways to prevent the dissemination of works. The certification of films, in other words, rating or age restrictions, that is required for distribution is a good example which clearly shows how the procedures are applied arbitrarily by the state. The documentary Dersim 38 that tells of massacre in Kurdish region in 1938 was not given a rating as it was considered to present the propaganda of PKK. And strangely, this was the time that the government apologized to Kurdish people about the massacre, even if rather informally. In this way, the government prohibited its distribution and screenings rather than directly censoring it, with the state reason being that the requirements for certification were not fulfilled. This is also procedural ways is not just for Kurdish films or arts, and there are also different filters that they are applying also for gay, lesbian movies and other kind of movies. Societal sensitivities. I think this censorship modality is the most recognized one by the audience here, because every country is dealing with this issue in different contexts. The societal sensitivities are not fixed. They change according to the time, country, and context. In Turkey, for example, we might name nationhood, religion, and sexuality as the primary area of social sensitivity. The response of individuals and communities who are offended by works of art range from reporting the works to the police or authorities to threatening the artist and the destruction of the works in question. The media plays a significant role in creating and escalating hostility. Regular features targets specific artworks using extreme hate speech and directing the attention of communities towards works which might otherwise have gone unnoticed. The result is often increased mobilization of anger and threats towards artists. I want to give an example of a theater play, Lick But Don't Swallow. In 2009, Lick But Don't Swallow, which told the story of an angel which found itself in an actress body on a porn set in Turkey. Vakit newspaper, extreme religious newspaper, reported in an article titled "Messages Full of Provocation from the Immoral Play," and later that sensible Muslims want this immoral play discarded before it is performed at all. So they hadn't seen it. I mean, it wasn't started. Due to the effect of successive reporting by the newspaper, the play crew demanded protection from the police. On the day that the crew visited the police, Beyoğlu municipality officers arrived at the theater venue and sealed the theater on the grounds that there are no fire escape ladders, which was true. When the number of threats through electronic mail and telephone increased, the crew decided not to perform the play anymore. After necessary arrangements were made at the venue was licensed and opened to the public again. The company performed the play only one day at E-Dance International Dance and Theatre Performance Festival in Istanbul under the category New Production without much publicity and also performed many times in abroad. Another example in this context, I don't have any image because it has never happened, is that Şükran Moral, a visual artist. Moral opened one of her shows with a performance in which she made love to a woman in front of a small audience in a gallery. After this performance was reported in the press, she received threats against herself and her extended family. The same was true for her gallerist on the account which Moral cancelled the exhibition. The response of legal and social organization to these incidents falls short of the constitutional and legal obligations. Whilst frequently ignored, Turkey's constitution guarantees that the state has the mandate to protect artworks and artists. Private art institutions and market. Artists are mostly reluctant to discuss their experience of censorship in private institutions in order to maintain positive relations with museums and galleries. The highly competitive nature of art markets and the blurring of artistic and non-artistic factors lead a situation in which the line between critical judgment and censorship is unclear. A full understanding of the impact of these dynamics on artistic freedom of expression will require more investigation by us. Following the cases Istanbul Modern, you can Google it, because I don't have time to tell it, but if you Google as Istanbul Modern censorship, you can find more information. These issues have been more widely discussed in Turkey, but this process is in its early stages. And it's summarizing. And I'll try to summarize the censorship modalities in Turkey after our first year of research, but I want to finish with the quotation of our interior ministry. Thank you.